Welcome to the third class in the study of the fourth and the final chapter of the Yoga Sutras. This chapter is titled the Kaivalya Pādaḥ, the chapter on liberation. The chapter talks about Janma, birth, how it's connected to karma, the wheel, cosmic wheel, Janma producing karma, and the escape out of it, which is the moksha. So last class, we finished the karma. So karma, what it shows, what Patanjali says is that he talks about the Satkaryavada, theory of causation, which is the past and the future of an object exist in the Swarupa, the true nature of that object. So essentially, the past and the future is contained in a latent form. That's what it says. Now, we will move on to a completely different topic. So, Patanjali is going to talk about the mind and the gunas, and he's going to distinguish this from the consciousness. He will refute others. So this chapter will give a historical perspective of the various philosophies that came up in India over the last 2,500 years. So Patanjali, or the author of the fourth chapter, will refute certain other schools of philosophy, primarily the Buddhist schools. So we will get a historical overview, and in the process, Patanjali is going to prove why this the Sankhya Yoga view of the world as Puruṣa, the permanent substratum, like a movie theater screen. The movie theater screen is not changing, on which every change is witnessed. That is all the changes happen like a movie that's playing. It's like that. He says, he'll say why that is the correct interpretation. And some of the other interpretations of the Buddhist schools is going to prove that they are not correct. So Patanjali starts off by saying that gunas are the basic constituent of matter, the basic all characteristics of matter, or essentially you can say these are the gunas are the basic constituents of matter. Te vyakta sukshma gunatmanah. Vyakta means manifested, right? Vyakta. Avyaktam is unmanifested. Vyakta, manifested, or sukshma, being subtle or unmanifest, whether these characteristics mentioned in 4.12. So remember, all these sutras, every sutra is linked to the previous sutra. So the previous sutra, we just now saw the past and the future characteristics, or the future characteristic or the past nature of an object. It exists in the Swarupa, the true nature of that object. So those characteristics, whether they are manifest or unmanifest, they are composed of the primary elements called the three gunas. Okay, so Prakriti is nothing but the three gunas. It is not the property of the Prakriti. Remember, important distinction. It is the Prakriti. The three gunas constitute the Prakriti. Okay, so in the manifest or the unmanifest form, Prakriti / Maya is composed of the gunas as the primary elements. Prakriti is trigunatmika. So in the unmanifested form, it is called Maya or Pradhana. In the manifest form, it's often called Prakriti, but it's all one and the same. It's used interchangeably. Okay, so Prakriti is trigunatmika. It means it is the nature of the three gunas. So this is again important. These gunas are not the properties of Prakriti. It is the Prakriti. It is so there's a difference. That's why the terminology in Vedanta and even in yoga, especially in Sankhya, it has to be very precise. You can't say, oh, the properties of the Puruṣa are so and so. because Purusha has no properties by nature. So it is the nature of Purusha to be some way. It is the nature of Prakriti to be some way. Even though Prakriti has, you can say it has properties, but it is very essence is the three gunas. So Prakriti is not a fourth thing that has the three gunas, like a person has three qualities. Prakriti is the three gunas in various forms. The only difference is these gunas can, they just change. We'll see all that. Okay. So the message that this sutra is trying to say is that it teaches the yogi to look past appearances. The world is a shapeshifter. Nothing you see is solid or final. You develop detachment from this. When you realize that the world is not permanent, you stop chasing the manifest forms and seek the Purusha, which is beyond gunas. It is the gunas that are vibrating. What is present now will become past or subtle in a moment. The subtle thing is also there, but it's in a different form. Okay. The three gunas are explained. So what are the three gunas? We all know that: Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. This was already explained in a previous sutra, in the second chapter. Sattva is purity, lightness, illumination, and harmony. Rajas is passion, activity, and drive. Tamas is dullness, heaviness, darkness / ignorance. Tamas also is ignorance, it's darkness, and inertia. So Prakriti, as I said, is the primal nature. It consists of the matter plus energy. Matter and energy are interchangeable. Gunas are the constituent element of Prakriti, which gives quality. It's like one of the meanings of guna. Guna, literally, we think of it as property, but one of the meanings of guna, because Sanskrit words have different meanings. One of them is strand. So people often refer to the gunas, the Prakriti, as this mat composed of the three strands, the white, red, and the dark blue that you see. They are the three gunas, Trigunatmikam. So the nature of the Prakriti is explained in the second chapter. Prakasha kriya sthiti bhutendriyatmakam bhoga pavarkatam drishyam. Drishyam, that which is seen, is of the nature of prakasha, which is lightness. Kriya, which is action, that is rajas. Lightness is sattva. Rajas, sthiti, is stagnancy, it's being in the same place, that is inertia, tamas. So, and it consists of bhutas and indriyas, matter and senses. And the purpose of the Prakriti is to provide experience and liberation, not to the Purusha, it is to this entity called the Jiva, because the Purusha is always liberated. This is where you find most of the Yoga Sutra books. They will say, oh, the Prakriti, the purpose of the Prakriti is to provide liberation to the Purusha. Now, the Purusha is always liberated. The confusion happens only when it comes in contact with the Prakriti, and there is this transfer of characteristics. We call the superposition. We've seen that in the Vedantic text. It's called adhyasa, anyonya adhyasa, mutual transfer of of the proper of the nature. And in the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gītā, the entire chapter is called Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga, the distinction between the three gunas, guna vibhagam, the three gunas explained, the details explained, and the distinction explained in detail. Sattvam rajastama iti guna prakriti sambhavaha nibadhanti mahabaho dehe dehinam avyayam. This is from the Bhagavad Gītā that I am quoting, 14.5. O mighty armed Arjuna, the Prakriti consists of the three gunas, sattva, goodness, rajas, passion, and tamas. These modes bind the eternal Atma to the body. Nibadnanti, banda, bind. Nibadnanti, binds. O mighty armed Arjuna Mahabaho, dehe, Dehinam avyayam. So avyayam dehinam, the imperishable. Avyayam means perish. Um, Dehinam avyayam. So it binds the imperishable Puruṣa to the perishable body. These modes bind the dehe. Dehe is the body. Dehinam. Dehi is that which exists in the body, and that is the consciousness. Okay. And sattva is defined as tatra sattvam nirmalatvat prakashakamanāmayam sukha sangena badnati jnana sangena chanaga. Among these, the sattva guna, the mode of goodness, being purer than the others, is illuminating and full of well-being. O sinless one, he calls Arjuna, it binds the, I shouldn't use the word soul, it binds the Atma by creating attachment for, it seems to bind it for, by creating attachment for a sense of happiness and knowledge. It seems to bind, or it binds the jiva. Sukha sangena batnati jnana sangena cha anaga. It binds by creating a attachment for a sense of happiness and knowledge, which is a great thing. But even that is an attachment, this craving for this blissful states. And finally, you have to go even past that to get liberation. Then rajas, rajo ragatmakam viddhi trishna sanga samudbhavam tannibadnati kaunteya karma sangena dehinam. Oh, Arjuna, rajoguna is of the nature of passion. It arises from worldly desires, and it binds the jiva through attachment to fruitive actions. And finally, tamas. Tamas tvajnanajam viddhi mohanam sarva dehinam pramadalasya nidrabihi tannibadnati bharata. O Arjuna, tamoguna is born of ignorance, is the cause of illusion of the embodied jivas. It dilutes all living beings through negligence, laziness, and sleep. So these are the three gunas. They cast a veil cast by the gunas from seeing the light within. Okay. And how the gunas delude a person into thinking they are the doer. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but Amy asked this question a few classes ago. Amy mentioned it's not very clear who does the action. So this is how it works. In the Bhagavad Gītā, in these shlokas, it's very clearly described. The body acts, the senses act, the prana acts, the mind thinks, the intellect decides. The ahankara then claims, I am doing. Okay? This is called anyonya adhyasa, mutual superposition. What happens? We've seen that in the Atma Bodha. Nature of the Atma is sentiency, is transmitted to the body, and the body seems sentient, even though this is inert. Once the Sukshma Shariram goes away, the whole thing falls dead. And wherever there's a Sukshma Shariram, it's like a mirror. Wherever there's a mirror, it can reflect light. So wherever there's a Sukshma Shariram, it can reflect sentiency. The whole thing comes alive. When the Sukshma Shariram leaves, the subtle body leaves, the entire thing falls dead. So the properties of the body and the mind are also transmitted to the Atma. Okay, it's a mutual superimposition. It's just a misunderstanding. And where is all the misunderstanding taking place? In the mind. The properties of the mind and the body, like I am good looking, I'm smart, they are transmitted to the I, because the I, the pure I, the Puruṣa, it doesn't have all these qualities. It is quality free. Okay, so in the Bhagavad Gītā, Bhagavan says that prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashah ahankara vimudatma kartaham iti manyate. The actions are performed by the gunas of Prakriti in various ways. The person who's deluded by ego, ahankara, so the ego, that's what it claims. Ego claims that it is the doer. then this person thinks I am doing. So person refers to the full entity. So in the body, you have the physical body, you have the subtle body, which is the mind. Let's say there are other things. There's mind. And then the consciousness, which is there everywhere, it's reflecting in this and it's pervading. So this entire entity, the reflected consciousness plus the mind and the body, that entire entity, which one for that there's a key thing called ahankara, which is the I, a sense of I ship, that thinks I, the body and the mind, I am doing the action. So it is the confused thing. Yes, Amy.
Thank you. It's like so much food for thought. But if the actions are done by the gunas or the body, then why does it go with the sukshma shariram in the form of like karma, or like go with the karna shariram?
Yeah, because the gunas, it belongs to Prakriti, and so the entire, even your Sukshma Shariram is composed of gunas. Anything that is changing, it is composed of gunas. That is the essence. Yeah. So the imprints. So think of it like a clay. Like your children have this Play-Doh thing, right? All those things. Every time that is start, the whole thing is changing imprints.
Okay, I think I got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So in another example, this is the example given in Atmabodha. Rajavat. So the king. So ancient. So let's say some king lived 3,000 years ago or whatever, 2,000 plus years ago. Alexander the Great. Say everybody says Alexander the Great conquered. He built a big empire and all that. So did Alexander actually build all the things, buildings, that this? No, other people did it. He probably didn't do anything. We don't know. Maybe he was a great warrior. Maybe he was not. Some kings are not even warriors. They don't even go. They'll be behind the lines and do all that. So, but everybody says he was the greatest warrior. He was the greatest. His army conquered everything, they say. But the king, does he do anything? No. So like his king's presence makes things happen. Rajavat, like a king's presence, doing in the presence of the king. That's why even in the charioteer example, in the presence of the lord of the chariot, the sarathi, the intellect, which is compared to the intellect, the charioteer, the person steering the horses, that person acts. The horses move. The lord of the chariot, the king, just sits in the chariot. So like that, the Puruṣa is like that. All the other things, by the light, that the consciousness light that is shed, it is doing by the nature. So we have some impulse. So this is where the free will versus your nature, this thing comes in. Because in the presence of the consciousness, consciousness just sheds light. In the presence, you can mold this clay whichever way you want when you realize. Or you can be blinded and just continue with your nature and keep doing more and more of that and increase the karmas. So is it somewhat clear? It's a heavy topic.
Yeah, it feels very deep. Yeah, but there's like clarity there.
Yeah, the more slowly you start thinking about this, which is why this entire Vedanta Sankhya, it's introspection. So it is all about rigorous introspection of what I am. So the Puruṣa is like a substratum. It is like, that's what Patanjali is going to now say. It is like a movie screen. Does the movie screen do anything? No. But it provides a medium for all this, the movie to be played. The changing images of the mind and the world are played. Okay. Puruṣa cannot be the doer. Why can't it be the doer? Can anybody say?
I think it has to do with it can't change. It's like eternal.
Exactly. So. Wonderful. Because to do any change, for example, a change, potential energy is converted into kinetic energy. Any change, to do any action requires a change. Any action, potential to kinetic energy, there's a change. So Puruṣa is the unchanging. And why is Puruṣa? Okay, what if Puruṣa changes? Then the logical question is, then to witness a change, you need an unchanging reference. So then all these logic we'll see. Then it'll say, oh, you need something else which is permanent, and it'll create infinite regress. So logically, all these things should hold. And this is where Buddhism. So yeah, I'll come to that point. Okay, now comes the realism versus idealism debate. Okay, I have to say what realism. So if you look at philosophers, now there's a lot of debate going on AI, consciousness, and everything. They all talk about these things: realism, idealism. The philosophers, they're asking, okay, can AI become conscious? Okay, what is consciousness? So what is the mind? All those questions they're asking. Western philosophers mainly. Sometimes Swami Swarupriyananda is invited, because generally there's a notion that it's only in Vedanta. Even among Western philosophers, they know that that's where the answer actually lies. Realism is the view that the world is real and separate from the mind. That's what we think it is, right? But there are some people who believe in idealism, the view that the world is just a projection of the mind, just like in a dream. In a dream, it's just a projection onto the mind. All these characters are figments in your mind. Is what the mind perceives real, or just a figment of imagination? So Yoga says there's no illusion. What you see is what is there, though colored differently through the lens of the mind. This yoga raises counterpoints against certain Buddhist schools of thoughts, and it says Puruṣa is the ultimate witness and not the mind. This is what we are going to see in 4.14 through 4.21. Okay, now I have to, since the all these counterpoints are launched against the Buddhist schools. So historically, at that time, the Buddhism was gaining some momentum in India. And this was 1000 to 2000 years ago. Because the Buddha was there 2500 years ago, and for 400 years after he passed away, not much was written down. It was much later that everything was transcribed, and it was much later that they developed all these schools of Buddhism. These schools did not come from Buddha. Buddha did not found any of this. It's a later scholastic classification, and not a list of 4 sects personally founded by the Buddha. The Tibetan scholasticism explicitly preserves this fourfold tenet system. And what are the 4 main schools? Vaibhashika, that external objects are real, all dharmas exist in past, present, and future. So very similar to Sankhya. Then Sautrantika, which is also called Kshanikavada, which means momentary nature. Kshanika means just a moment. So it makes a drastic deviation. So I think it was King Ashoka who called for this confluence, and these people wouldn't argue on what the core of Buddhism was. So there are 4 things that came up. There are 4 types of people. They all debated and said, no, this is correct. No, that is correct. So the second one is Kshanikavada. External objects are accepted, but cognition is momentary. Continuity is causal. Continuity is causal means there's a sequence. Not because one permanent thing remains unchanged through the sequence. Remember, in yoga, that is the Puruṣa. But it says there is continuity. We're continuing because we remember the past, right? It explains continuity. Even though things are just momentary, there's continuity because each moment causes or conditions the next moment. So there's a Kshanikavada. There is no substratum. So this is against Yoga and Sankhya, which says the substratum is the Puruṣa. And because it's like electricity, memory, you have memory, there's a volatile memory, right? Which when you pull the plug, the whole thing is gone. Like that, the Purusha is like the electricity which sustains this memory in this life. Of course, the next life it carries over, but that is like the non-volatile memory. Okay, then Vijnanavada school or Yogacara. It's consciousness only, representation only. External objects, it says external objects as independently existing is denied or radically reinterpreted. What it says is everything is just in your mind projection. There are no real objects. And that's scary because all these things that I'm seeing, all that stuff, it doesn't exist. How do you feel? Even the feeling is in the mind. That's what they say. Then finally comes Madhyamaka. There was a giant, intellectual giant called Nagarjuna. And this is very close to Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. But he says finally all dharmas are empty. All nature of objects are empty of, empty of intrinsic nature, swabhava. But in this portion, the 8 sutras, the 2 that are debated against are the Kshanikavada and Vijnanavada, where the Kshanikavada is everything is momentary. Kshana means moment. So everything is momentary. There's no continuing substratum. And this is opposed to yoga because yoga believes in the substratum of Puruṣa. Next one says everything exists in the mind. There's no world. This is also opposed to yoga because yoga believes in Puruṣa and Prakriti, 2 different entities, completely separate entities. So these 2 are opposing. So if you ask me why Madhyamaka was not opposed, it's the timeline. We'll see that. Okay. So Vijnanavada, external world does not exist. Kshanikavada, mind is not a stable container, but a rapid series of momentary cognitions. So the context of the debates was that India was a rich bed for philosophies and religions. There was a lot of tolerance. When people debated when they debated the superiority of their philosophy with opponents, they first had to clearly state the opponent's point of view and then debate why it's not true. So these are the rules of the debate. They did not go on chopping off heads. So this is how it happened. There'll be a big assembly of learned people, and these 2 people, typically giants in the field. So here you see Adi Shankaracharya debating Mandana Mishra, who later, we've seen the story, become Adi Shankara's disciple. So there was no bloodshed, warfare, and all this. It is usually these debates which establish the course of beliefs, everything. So the main opponents of the Yoga Sankhya school of thought are the Vijnanavada school of Mahayana Buddhism. External world doesn't exist. Objects are also projections on the mind. Then the Kshanikavada, where the mind is not a stable container, but a rapid fire series of disappearing thoughts. And we also saw why yoga attacks Vijnanavada. If the world is just a hallucination, then the entire Sankhya theory of Prakriti, the whole thing, it collapses. Yoga requires Prakriti to be real so that Puruṣa can be distinguished from it. Okay, why yoga attacks Kshanikavada? The doctrine of momentariness, because if the mind is destroyed every millisecond, who remembers? Yoga needs a stable background to explain samskara, karma, everything. So that background is the Puruṣa, which keeps the mind active. Kshanikavada does not deny memory as an experienced fact. It denies a permanent remembering substance called a substrate, the Puruṣa, behind memory to keep the memory, like electricity keeping the volatile memory RAM in a computer on. Like that, the Puruṣa is needed. So far, is it clear? So we will see the gist of reputation. Everybody, Sumitra, Lena.
I have a question.
Yeah. Yes, Lena.
So, like you say, the Buddhism, it's a lot of school. The forming of the schools were established hundreds of years after Buddha
Yes.
passed. And then in Yoga Sutra was talking about the definition, or it's a sort of like a textbook of what yoga is. But we haven't gone through, so I don't know. But you were saying it's to refute Buddhism.
I'll come to that. Yeah. So I'll come to. So yeah. Yeah, I'll come to. Give me few more slides. We'll come to that. Okay.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. And then Amy, you had another quick question.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify if all of the schools that you
Yes.
showed, if they all had a concept of karma, like cause and effect.
Yes, that is 100%. Everything that
Okay.
came out of India, Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, karma is essential and the core. Buddha clearly said that. So of course they
Yeah.
can't go against, because he said, on that night of liberation, I saw my past hundreds of births. No, not hundreds, thousands. No, tens of thousands. This is how it goes. Millions of my births I saw, and this will be my last birth.
Okay, so they all had that, but then
Yes.
but there's like how far did they take it? Because if things are momentary or if objects aren't real, then it
Yeah.
well, maybe that
Okay.
gets into the
Yes.
weeds.
Yeah.
But the main
I'll give you. So
clarification
it's
is,
very. So the way these all of these four schools, they evolved. They did not have one definition at the beginning, which was the same after a few hundred years. They all evolved. Whereas in yoga and Sankhya, it was Puruṣa Praman, whatever is, it's based on what's in the Vedas, slightly different interpretation from Vedanta, which came much later. So it was more or less fixed. So these schools, we will see how it evolved based on some logic, because this essentially these debates strengthened these schools of thought. Okay, I'll give an example. So I'll come there. Okay, all right. Now the refutation. And also I'll answer Lena's question on the timeline and all that, so you get an idea. So Lena's question was, you're saying the Yoga Sutras is essentially a treatise of the mind, stilling the mind. That's how I introduced the art and science of stilling the mind in my first slide when we started the study many months ago. That's what I said. Now I'm saying it's opposing other schools of philosophy. So the one thinking is maybe this fourth chapter is a later addition. The other thinking is that maybe Patanjali is doing this by explaining the mind. He's also refuting the other schools in like a two birds in one stone kind of fashion. You can think of it whichever way you want. Maybe it's a later addition, but it has a lot of value. Okay, so we'll come to that with timeline. When I get the timeline, Lena, it'll become more clear for you. Now, the phase one of the opposition. So the refutation takes place in two phases. First is to prove that the object is independent of the mind. This is against Vijnanavada, which says external objects are just projections in your mind. Then phase two, the four sutras, is proving that the subject Puruṣa is permanent and separate from the mind, because Shanika, this is against Shanikavada. Shanikavada says that everything is momentary. There's no substratum. There's shunya. There, even the Nagarjuna, the Madhyamaka Buddhism, is also called Shunyavada. Things are devoid of the inherent thing. And we've seen that in Dakshinamurti Stotram. Even Shankaracharya, while he's giving, it is a Prakarana Grantha, right? Dakshinamurti Stotram, it is the essence of the Vedanta as an introductory text, maybe an advanced introductory text. There he opposes this Madhyamaka school by saying, okay, then in deep sleep, there's nothing to witness. So there's a disconnect. The only way you can explain is even in deep sleep, you have slept well, because the Puruṣa is the substratum is there. If there was, according to Nagarjuna, in deep sleep, there's nothing that's happening. It's completely empty, because it's empty the way he goes about. We've seen that in Dakshinamurti Stotram. You, the subject, are different from whenever you're seeing something, I'm the subject, that is the object. But in deep sleep, that subject-object distinction goes away. And he says, so that is the nature of the truth, the core. And then Shankaracharya says, no, the subject is still there, and that's how you know that you slept well. So that's how he proves that. It's a little more subtle than that, but that's the essence. Okay, Vyasa's example to prove that one object, many minds. We'll see that this here. The example he gives is, there's a husband. He has a beautiful wife. The husband feels pleasure and sees beauty when he sees his wife. Then there's another woman. She thinks she's much better looking than this other woman, and she feels pain, jealousy. The sannyasi is indifferent. If the woman were merely a projection of mind A, she would be made of only pleasure. How could mind B see pain in her? And we'll see through this argument how Vijnanavada essentially got strengthened by debates with Sankhya. Okay, so, all right, now the timelines. So this will answer part of Leena's question. So the Buddha, people generally think around 500 BCE. There, the Yoga Sutras, it's all over the place. Patanjali, if you see the Chidambara, the temple's Sthala Puranam, which is the temple's story, it puts it at more, even past 400 BCE. Many people say Patanjali was there around the time of the Buddha, 400 BCE. Some people say maybe later. So even that is not known. Then Nagarjuna, the Madhyamaka school, Nagarjuna was the founder of Madhyamaka, but the text became strong much later on, 150 to 250 CE. And then the Vijnanavada, one of these, which is being debated, is 200 to 400 CE. And clearly, the 400 CE comes after 400 BCE. So either the 400 BCE is wrong for this fourth chapter, or the fourth chapter is a later addition, or the text is refuting earlier forms of proto forms of Buddhist idealism and momentariness that were later systematized. So we don't know. Because nowhere does it say Vijnanavada was being opposed. Do you see that? So he's not even saying anything. It is the way you'll see in the next sutra or so, you'll see the way it's very clearly as an argument, debate. It is not as a sutra, as a condensed form of a certain concept, okay? But it has a lot of value because it clearly tells what the mind is. How the three gunas define an object. Parinamaikatatvat vastu tattvam. The three gunas manifest together, ekatva, and therefore what you see is just the essence of an object, which is vastu tattvam, instead of the constituent gunas, which are constantly changing. Gunas are never the same. They're constantly changing. Even this person sitting still in meditation, calm, inside there's a turmoil going on. So many blood is flowing, all that, like this gunas, even when things are same, even the atoms, the electrons are going around, a lot of things are happening. Parinama means transformation, or in the end. Ekatvat, parinam ekatvat, gunas manifesting as one. Vastu tattvam, one sees the essence of objects. One sees it's a sutra, so they remove that. So vastu tattvam, you see the essence of an object because the gunas manifest as one. If everything is sattva, rajas, and tamas, which are constantly changing, why do we see one stable object like a pot, tree, stone, body, or a mountain? So Sutra 4.14 answers, because they do not transform randomly. They transform cohesively. They transform together in a coordinated way to produce a recognizable object. This sutra is aimed at the Buddhist idealist objection, especially Vijnanavada. The Vijnanavadan says what you call an object is only a projection or appearance in the mind. There's no independent real object. Yoga says no. The object has its own vastu tattva, object reality. It is not a mere mental projection. It is a real configuration of the gunas. So, so that's why I'm saying, if everything is constantly changing, why do we see this is like a opposition from the Vijnanavada? So yoga says, no, no, no. It is not like things are all random. So it's not like some random thing happening in your mind. The gunas manifest in a cohesive way. If everything in the universe is just a mix of these gunas, constantly shifting and vibrating, why do we see solid, distinct objects like a cow, mountain, like that? Why doesn't the world look like a chaotic blur? Vyasa clarifies, even though the gunas are three, sattva, rajas, and tamas, when they combine to form an object, they undergo a unique, unified transformation, parinama ekatvat. They don't mix chaotically. That mix, according to strict laws, produce one specific result, which is the essence of an object, the vastu tattvam. Okay, this primarily focuses on refuting the idealism theory. The idealism central doctrine, however, is that consciousness is real and that external things do not exist, which means cognition is real, I should say. Everything is in the mind. Since every object changes every moment, there is no real object. This is their logic. So do you see how all these things have come out? They all came about from the Sankhya. They're saying, okay, Sankhya says gunas are constantly changing. Therefore, I came up with an idea. I need a different idea because I will be the same as the Sankhya. I am now calling it Buddhist. Why do I want to call it Buddhist? Because at the time, things had degraded. India, at the time, it had become very ritual oriented. So the Buddha, which means there's a strict class division in the society. So the Buddha came and he gave it to the common masses, especially the poorer people. And then after that, a lot of people liked the Buddhism. They didn't like these rituals of the Hindus. So they wanted to distinguish themselves. So they came up with this. You're saying gunas. Now gunas are constantly changing. Now I got an idea. I want to distinguish from you. So I'm going to say everything is happening in the mind. Do you kind of get it's very complex how the whole thing came about, but an idea of the thought pattern involved. Okay. So the other example is, when the gunas change, there's one lead guna. One guna becomes a leader. In the example, Swami Hariharananda explains that gunas never work in a one-third fashion. That would be pralaya or cosmic dissolution. To create an object, one guna becomes a leader. To create a fire, when you say fire, what first comes into your mind? Anybody?
Rajas.
That's right. But what aspect? That's something you can relate to that comes to your mind.
Gives light.
Yeah, but heat comes first, right? Heat. Fire means fire will burn. That's what comes in your mind. Heat. So heat. So that is the dominant rajas. Heat is the angi, and the angas are the followers. Those are the light and the fuel. Because of the specific unified ratio, we get the distinct object called fire. Vyasa gives the example of milk turning into curd uniformly. Milk is made up of particles. However, the change happens to the whole entity in a unified fashion. The curd is the yogurt is a real entity, not a random heap of particles or a hallucination of the mind. Okay, so now this is the reality of the existence is also touched upon in chapter 2. Patanjali says, Kritartam prati nashtamapyanashtam tadanyasadharanatvat. The seen Prakriti ceases to exist for one whose purpose is accomplished, even though it does not cease to exist for the other Purushas, other entities, due to being common to them. Okay? What this says is that everything is not a projection of the mind because of this. So this was already hinted before, which is why some people say this chapter is a later addition. We don't know what the reasoning is, what the reality is. Okay, there are differences in perception of the same object. Now, Patanjali, or the author of this chapter, says, Vastu samye chitta vedat tayor vibhakta pantha. Vastu samye means the same vastu. Samye, the same vastu, samam, same. It's English also, it's the same. Vastu samye, vastu is an object, the same object. Chitta vedat, due to the differences in the mind, ayor chitta vedat, of those minds, vibhakta pantha, so they appear, or the same object is perceived differently. Pantha means paths. So very similar, you see the English roots, some of these roots, pantha. So the perceptions, paths, the objects are perceived differently due to the difference. The object is perceived differently due to the differences in the minds. So this is the classic example that Vyasa uses. What Vyasa says is, so this the path of an object being and the path of the mind perceiving are totally different categories. They are not the same thing. So it's not a projection on the mind. Object is existing independent of the mind. So the logic, we saw this woman who's a beautiful woman, husband loves, the other woman is jealous of her beauty, and the rishi is indifferent. If the women were merely a projection of the husband's mind, she would be made of pleasure. If she is made of pleasure, then everyone who looks at her should feel pleasure. But the rival feels pain. The rival mind feels pain. Therefore, the woman herself is neither pleasure nor pain. So she separate. The pleasure and pain are reactions occurring in the individual minds. This is yoga stance. Now the Vijnanavada person can say, but there can be many chitta santanas, which means many mind streams. Each mind stream has its own karmic seed. In it is so we've first seen it cannot be one mind, like in a dream, your mind, and in your dream also there are many characters, different minds. So if one is just pleasure, then all the other minds in the dream should also see pleasure, but it's not the case. So now the Yogacara says, okay, there are many mind streams, not just one mind stream. Each has its own karmic seeds, and because beings have shared or compatible karmic seeds, they experience what looks like a common world. So that's kind of very twisted. Yogacara can say there's no external woman existing independently outside the consciousness, but there are multiple karmically connected mind streams that generate coordinated appearances. Yoga objects and says, if the woman is only mind appearance, what accounts for the common object across this different minds? How do you, some parts, everybody knows she's wearing a white sari, and generally people think she's good looking. How do you know the common aspects? She is as this, all these earrings, all this, everybody, the jealous or the loving mind, both think the same. She has these features, this sari, that color, all that. Now, of course, this woman thinks she's not pretty and she's more pretty, and the husband thinks she's the prettiest woman. Yoga object says, what says some of these are the same, some of these are different. Then yoga, this Vijnanavada says, shared karmic seeds and interdependent mind streams. Then yoga replies, that's too indirect. Simpler and correct answer is that there is a real object, real vastu made of gunas, which different minds encounter and react to differently. This is how they started giving counter arguments, and they boosted their position. But eventually yoga comes and says, no, you guys are just making up things. It is real object does exist. So reality versus illusion, Maya, Patanjali's logical climax. Nachaika chitta tantram vastu tada pramanakam tada kin syat. Okay, this is the one that I said. It is like a question. However, the object itself does not depend on any one mind. For if it did, then what would happen to that object if it were not experienced by that mind? Tada kim syad. Kim, what would happen? Syad means would happen to that object. Tada kim syad. When na cha eka chitta tantram vastu tat apramanakam. Na, not eka, one chitta tantram means sustained, when the object is not sustained by one mind, when it's if he says, if the object does not depend on any one mind, for if it actually, okay, he's doing a counter argument. He says, okay, let's say you tell me the object depends on one mind, then when it is not being perceived by the mind, what happens to the object? Will it disappear? And then will it come back exactly as it is when you're looking at it? So that seems not logical. Vyasa uses the disappearing world absurdity logic. The Vijnanavadi says objects exist only because my mind sees it. My mind vibrates as a form of the object. Vyasa says, if the object is one mind dependent, then the moment you stop looking at it, the object must vanish, vinashyet. And if the object vanishes, when you look back at it, it must be recreated out of nowhere. This is absurd. The object must be self-dependent. Swa alambana. It stands on its own reality regardless of the mind observing it or not. Okay, so that is Vyasa's counter argument. And how objects are perceived. Taduparaga-pekshitvat chittasya vastu jnata jnatam. Tat uparaga-prekshitvat. Raga, it means color. Uparaga, the coloring, that coloring. Apekshitvad, due to the need for that coloring. Chittasya, of the mind. Vastu, objects. Jnata, or agnatam. So the objects are either known or not known, depending on whether the mind observing is colored by it or not. Okay, we've seen this example in some of the Vedanta classes. The way in these theories, Vedanta and Yoga, their cognition has two steps. Especially in Vedanta, it's given very thoroughly. There is the vritti vyapti and the phala vyapti. Which is the vritti vyapti is a mechanical process. When the mind sees something, the next, the crystal example, when you bring a crystal close to a green leaves, the crystal looks green. So the image is etched. This is a mechanical process. Then the consciousness shed lights to reveal that. That's when you say, I know this is a bull. We've seen that example, right? So the coloring means this aspect. So sometimes when you are daydreaming, we are thinking of something, we are looking at an object, but it did not register. Everybody agrees with me, right? We've all daydreamed like that. We are looking at an object and somebody says, hey, did you see that? Oh, I didn't notice it at all. But you were actually keeping your eyes open. Things were registered in your eyes, in your mind, the vritti vyapti was happening, the mechanical process was happening. What was not happening is the pada vyapti. So this is also called akhandakara vritti and purushakara vritti. The vritti vyapti is mechanical, akhandakara vritti. That's vritti is a thought process. Then purushakara vritti. In this vritti, the vritti is a modification of the mind. The purushakara, cognition, you become aware of the features. So the coloring, Patanjali says this is how the perception happens. So, and in the first chapter, it says Shina vritter abhijatasyeva mane grahita grahana grahyeshu satsta janjanata samapattihi. So he explains the mind is like a transparent crystal or a piece of cloth. For the mind, the cloth can be dyed. The crystal, when you bring it next to an object, it takes the color of the object. For the mind to know an object, the mind must physically interact with it via senses. Objects must dye or color the mind. When the coloring happens, the mind transforms into the shape of the plant here. The object is then known. This is how Patanjali explains the cognition. How this subtly argues against Vijnanavada. Vijnanavada says what you call the object is only the mind's appearance. Yoga says no, the mind's appearance is caused by contact with an object. The object is one thing, mental coloring is a different thing. Okay. It defeats Vijnanavada in a subtle way. It does not merely say the object is real. It says why an already existing object is sometimes known and sometimes not known, because the mind, it is colored or not colored by the mind. Okay. Now 4.17 is a bridge to the witness argument. Because the mind knows an object only when it is colored by it, the mind's knowledge is intermittent, right? Sometimes you're seeing an object, you know it. You're not seeing, you don't know it. What is intermittent and changing cannot be the final witness. So that's what Patanjali is going to establish. Because witness is something which is a reference point. If witness keeps changing, it cannot be a witness because there's no ground truth. Okay, it's like a person who is moving, who's in a boat in a street, in a river, and to the person, it's sometimes very difficult, even in a train, to see whether somebody, a bicycle or a car, or especially a car, is parked or it's moving. And so the relative, so you need a stable reference to know whether something is moving or not, right? So that's why you need a stable witness. So this, what is intermittent and changing cannot be a final witness. I mean, you can say, okay, witness can change, but then it creates this thing, then something else, there should be something, if it is possible, it will happen. There can be something else which can see this changing witness. And over evolution for trillions, I don't know how many years, this could have come. So, but that has not come, which means the Puruṣa is the unchanging witness. So this prepares Sutras 4.18 to 4.21. The changing mind or stream of momentary cognition must itself be known by a changeless Puruṣa. So 4.17 completes the Vijnanavada refutation indirectly, but its deeper force points towards the refutation of Kshanikavada. Okay. Sada jnata chitta vrittayastat prabho purushasya parinamitvat. Due to being changeless, due to being changeless, the changes of the mind are perceived by Puruṣa, the master. Prabho means the master. Sada jnata is known always, at all times, continuously, without a break. The changes of the mind are known to the Puruṣa, even when the mind is shut in deep sleep. How do you know? Because when you wake up, so deep sleep is like bliss. I slept very well. I did not dream. You know that. the sense of time is lost. You didn't know you slept for. I felt slept so well. Wow, so much time has passed. You say. So the changes of the mind are perceived by the Puruṣa at all times. Sada means sada. At all times. Jnataha, perceived. Chitta vrittayaha, the modifications of the mind. To whom? Tat prabho, of the master. Puruṣasya, and due to what? Puruṣasya parinamitvat, due to the changelessness of the self, every change. Because you can say, if like when the person on the water and the person walking on the river, on the bank, they're moving at the same pace, you wouldn't know if the person is walking or standing still, right? So you need something stable. So the mind cannot be something, the Puruṣa cannot be something that's moving. The final witness has to be stable. Okay, so with that, we will, so this serves as the final nail to refute the Vijnanavada theory. Consciousness is momentary. It says it is permanent. So we will look at more of this next class.